Okay, so good morning, everybody. Today we're covering basics of CSS and explaining exactly what it is, how it's used, how it came to be. I'm not sure who invented it or who designed it, but it was developed several years ago, and it's used as in addition to HTML. As I showed you on Tuesday, you can create an HTML or page, a website, using exclusively text, unformatted, no CSS, nothing unusual about it. And you don't have to use Dreamweaver or anything special to do that. If you just wanted to create a term paper for yourself that was a web, that you could share on the web, you could do that. Well, if you want to dress it up a little bit, and that's where CSS becomes very helpful. Because in the past, and this is what you're looking at right now, is a web page, and I've noticed it in Dreamweaver, I have this split. So if you want to follow along with me, you can. This is lesson 3 that I'm using. So if you download those files, you can open them up. Also, just to let you know too, that when you're doing the lessons in the book, what you should do, let me cover this, and we will cover it again. But what you need to do when you're in Dreamweaver is that we need to go to Site, and you need to create a new site. Okay. And in this site is where you will establish a root folder. And within that root folder, you will also establish an image folder. And now each of the lessons that are provided for us in the textbook serve as a root folder. Normally, when you're working on your own website locally, before you publish it, you have a folder that contains anything and everything on your website. That is called your root folder. And everything, as I said, everything that's in your website needs to be contained in that folder. You do not rename it. You do not move it around on your desk, from your desktop to another folder or inside a document folder or something like that, because then the path to those files will get corrupted. So what I've done is I created, you can see that if I said new, it says unnamed website. Well, you can name this. Let me go ahead and cancel this, and I'm going to show you, instead of new, I'm going to manage sites, because I already have a number of sites. And you'll see that I have one. This is a second one that I made for 2020. And you can see that I have a whole slew of websites that I manage here. This one here has already been named. You can name them whatever you want. I'm going to go ahead and rename this one Art 196 2021. And since it's the only one that I have for 2021, and I'll go ahead and I'll name it Spring 2021. Okay, so it can be whatever name you want. Now, the critical part of this is twofold at the moment, because we're not publishing any of these. What you need to do is you need to establish where that root folder is. So here we have local site folder. Once you have downloaded the files from Google Drive, or if you've gone to Peach Pit Press and downloaded the files there from the textbook, wherever you have stored them, keep them safe in a single place. Don't move them around. And then what you'll do is you'll click on this little folder icon here. And you'll notice that for today, I have folder number 3, lesson 3 selected. Lesson 3 for today will be my root folder. And you can see contained in it are a series of HTML files. And there's also an image folder in here. So I just want to make sure that I select lesson 3. That's the one that this is linked to. Now, some of the HTML files in here have images in them. And those images are linked to that image folder contained inside the folder within lesson 3. So what you want to do next is where it says advanced settings, twirl down on that. And where it says local info, you'll see here, default images folder. Click on that folder icon and make sure that it is located. Again, let's make sure that it's the one located inside lesson 3. With that one selected, click choose. And then I can click save. It updates everything, and then I'm done. Now you'll notice over to the right in Dreamweaver, with the File tab selected, here are all of the files and that image folder that are contained within this lesson. So every time we do a new lesson, you're going to have to change the root folder to that lesson and make sure that you also update the image folder to the image folder contained inside that lesson. I hope that's clear to everyone. I will be repeating it again and again and again. It is really essential to understanding web design, and especially when you go to publish your website. And later this semester, when we complete lesson 7, when you publish it, when your Wix website, you don't have to worry about that because it's already, you're editing online. You don't need to worry about where your root folder is. If you don't need to worry about FTP, which stands for File Transfer Protocol. You don't need to worry about anything because it's already online. However, when we publish the lessons, when we publish our MobiRise website, and at the very end of the semester, when we publish our Dreamweaver website, it will be really critical that this works, what I'm showing you now. So back to the lesson at hand here, which is CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Prior to CSS, when designing websites in HTML, it was really very awkward. HTML was never meant to be a design medium. As I said, it was developed by Tim Berners-Lee, and he used it exclusively to publish scientific papers and make them available to everybody throughout the world. And all they had to do was log into a browser, open up his page, and you have access to it. That's it. But let's say, for example, one of the basic things that you do in websites is that you control the font for text and you control the color. Two very simple things. I have the page split right here. And this is the first one. This is HTML formatting, the HTML formatting page, which is HTML formatting.html. And it's in split view. So you can see what the browser sees here at the top, and you can see the code view at the bottom. And you can see, just as we were talking about on Tuesday, that here's the doc type. And really this harkens back to the first version. It's 1.0. Remember, we're using HTML 5.0 now. But back at one of the first legacy formattings that we had available here, in order to change the font, in order to change the size, in order to change the color of the type, it had to be embedded in the code itself. And that got to really become a nuisance. It became very tedious because, as you can see, line by line by line, you had to establish all of those attributes. So for example, let's say for all of the H1 tags, and you can see those that they're a little bit larger. If I click on the first one, the Rosencrantz here, you can see that I have the opening tag for H1 and the closing tag for H1. So that's an H1. If I click on the Hamlet, okay, down here, and I highlight it, you can see that this is in line 12. Same thing, but line by line, not only do we have the type, but we have the font, the face, the size, and the color all established here. Okay, line by line by line. So for example, what if I wanted all of my H1 tags to be green, okay, instead of blue? Well, I'd have to go in to that line, and where it says blue here, I could type in green, or I could put in a hexadecimal number. We'll talk about those a little bit later. But if I were to type in green, you'll notice that it changes to green, but all the other H1 tags remain blue. So that became, as I said, really a huge nuisance, because you would have to go into the code line by line by line, and you would have to change it. So for example, let's say I wanted, instead of the body copy to be Verdana, maybe I wanted it to be Times Roman. So if I select that, I could go in here and I could type in Times Roman. And you can see that it changed. But again, it's only that singular line, and that's it. If I wanted to change the size, I could do that. And again, line by line by line, I would have to change the code. What a pain. Okay, so therefore, CSS was developed. It wasn't adopted until several years later. But if I go ahead and I click on the next one here, it's identical, with the exception that the purpose of CSS was to strip HTML down to its basic fundamental code, and that's it. And then all of the design or the visual attributes would be stored away separately as CSS, as style sheet, in a style sheet. Now, style sheets can be embedded. You can put in a style that's within the line of the code itself. I don't recommend that you do that. But as you can see here, if we scroll to the top in the head of the document, remember I said the head of the document is reserved for a variety of things. One is the title of your page, but you can see that also we have here, it says style type text / CSS. Okay, so again, that's the opening tag. Here's the closing tag for style, and contained within that, we have two styles. One for H1 tags and the other for the paragraph tags. So if we do choose to change the color, the font, the size for each of these, they can be done in one fell swoop. That was the whole purpose of this. Now, as I said, you can have the styles, embedded in the head of the document, but then it only affects that singular page. So if I were to create a new page, I would have to either copy and paste this into the new page. But what works even better yet is that what we will be using later on is an attached style sheet. It's a separate document that will be attached to a page. And that once you attach it to that page, it automatically formats, for example, in this case, all the H1 tags, all of the P tags in the same format. So but again, it can be a little tricky from time to time when you screw up, then you'll have to go in and fix it. But now watch what happens. So for example, again, with my H1 tag, if I want to change the color from blue to green, I go into the head of the document and I can just change it from here from blue to green. And in one fell swoop, you'll notice that now all of the H1 tags have been changed. And typically in most design, you want consistency from page to page. If you wanted each one of these H1 tags to be a different color, then we would use a different style for that. Each one would have to contain a different style. And instead of making it an H1 tag, an H1 style that would be changed, we would probably have to use something a little bit more specific, which we will get into a little bit later. So the way that CSS works is that it's a cascading style sheet. Whatever you assign to a basic HTML tag will be inherited by everything else on your page with those tags, unless you specify otherwise, with a class or with an ID tag that, or an ID, I should say, not a tag, but an ID that is specific to that individual element. You'll find that we use classes very often to differentiate within a page one H1 tag from another, to make them different from one another, to distinguish one from another visually, but they will have the same syntax. Likewise, if I wanted to change in the P, all of my P tags, instead of Verdana, if I wanted this time to change that to Times Roman, I can put in Times Roman. Okay. And notice that they've all changed. They've all been updated. So that was the whole purpose of that, to strip away in HTML all of the visual attributes from the content and to separate them so that we could change them in one fell swoop. Okie doke. Now, even if you have a page that is not styled by CSS, because each page is has default HTML settings, and each page, excuse me, is rendered by the browser, you'll notice that we have, let's look at the code and both this. Okay. So you can see that in here, we don't have any styling, okay? But the default tags, if you do nothing to it, these will be the default sizes for H1 through H6. And this is a paragraph. And then remember I used the other day, this is not an unordered list, what their appearance will be. Now, if you have changed those preferences or those settings in your browser, it will, if no styles have been assigned, it will then automatically change it. But if nothing has been assigned, then these will be the default sizes and the default that will be used. The default size for paragraphs typically is 16 pixels. The default font is typically Times New Roman. And also the color for the text default is black. So if you assign nothing, that's what the appearance will be for all of this. Okie doke. So the next thing, how does CSS work? It's based on what is called a box model. So if I switch to that box model and we look at this page here, you can see that I have 3 different divs here, or boxes, I guess you want to call them. Let's move this up a little bit. With, and I'm going to switch over here from Files to CSS Designer. And you can see in here that there is one style that has been assigned here. It's a box model. It's been assigned to H1. It's been assigned to a variety of other elements as well on this page. So we have box model for strong. We have box model for italic. We have box model. So they've all been strung together. And if I also, what I'm doing is I'm looking here and I'm looking at this in a couple of different ways. So under CSS Designer, if I look under selector, you can see that one selector has been created that overwrites the default styles that I was talking about. And if I also look at it here in show set, if I don't do that, you have to kind of scroll through all of these options here. And there's a variety of them that are governed here. We have the layout, we have type, we have the borders, we have the background. And those are your basic ones. And then we can also control more through this as well. But these are your 4 basic settings here. Now, when I have show set and I have this selector selected, it will show me all of the properties for this that have been assigned, and I can change them. And again, like the last page, I can go in here and you can see that this is embedded in the head of the document. It has not been assigned as an external style sheet yet, but we have here, and we can look at the definition of all of these, and you can see that this is dot box model for H1, and then it's divided by a comma, then box model for paragraph, box model strong, box model for emphasis or italic. And you can see all the colors, the fonts, the margins, the padding has been assigned to all of these. So what do all of these things mean? We have borders. So every element that you have on a page, we could have a single unit of text. We have a single line of text that there is a border around that is invisible usually, but can be defined. Now, if we just specify border 3 pixels, then that means that it will be a uniform border all around the entire paragraph or the entire line of type, okay? If I only wanted the border to be along the top, or if I wanted the border to be different on each side, or have a border only on one side, I can do that. I can change the size of the border on each of them, on each of the sides, the top, the right, the bottom, and left. I can change the color. I can change the style on each of them. Okay? So there's a lot of variables. Now, there's also, we have what is called padding, and we have margins. Well, the padding is the space that exists around that element itself that's being defined. And you can see that the padding right now is 5 pixels. We can change that uniformly, or again, because the top, right, bottom, and left can be defined separately, we can do that as well. And again, the margins are the space outside of our box. So again, we can increase or decrease the space around each of these elements, again, individually or uniformly. So for right now, I'm just going to use the basic change the default settings here. And I can either do that in the code view here, or I can do this over here. So let's start with the layout. And let's say if I look at the layout, I can see that the width is defined in pixels. And this is very tiny. I can't make it bigger for you, but it's 550 pixels. If I wanted that to be larger, let's say I wanted it to be 750 pixels, I could do that. Okay. So let's go ahead and hit the tab key. And you'll notice that uniformly, the width of each of those paragraphs is increased. And no matter how big or how small your browser is, because it is defined in pixels, it will remain that uniform length. We can also define the length of each of these elements in percentages as well. So for example, if I always wanted all of these to maintain a length that is 100% the width of my browser, the page that it's in, I could switch this. And I could, instead of using pixels, I could specify 100%. And notice that they are all, it doesn't matter what size I resize my browser, they will always be 100%. Whoops, yeah, there we go, okay. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the 550 pixels, what we had before, and that can be done there. And you do have to define that, there we go. Similarly, we can come back in here and I can go in and I can change some of the other features. Let's change the border color from 3 pixels to 10 pixels. And let's change it from blue to green. And again, it uniformly does that because all of these elements have been defined with the same style. Okie doke. You see how this is working now? Each of these elements. And again, I can change the line height. And if I change the margins right now, that is, let's go ahead and I'm going to change this from 10. I'm going to go back to 5 pixels. There we go. But let's say I want more space from surrounding the text from the text to the border itself. So I would need to change the padding. So if I go in here and I change that to 10, now you can see that there's a little bit more space around all of it. Let's make it really visible and change it to 20 pixels. And there you go. So there's a lot more air around the text itself. Likewise, maybe I want more space between each of those boxes. So there I would have to go back in and I have to change the margins for each of these. So again, let's change this from 5 to 10 and see how that looks. Okay. And if I go back and I change that to 20 pixels, I'm going to get even more space. Okay. Let's bring that up a little bit. Okay, so now there's more space between each of those elements. So that's how that's done. Everything that you decide that you want to do, there will have to be a rule that defines that overwrites the default settings. Okay. So when you want to apply, let me go to, I'm going to look at another example here. Let's look down here. I'm going to look at this. This is the finished one. And this is in your textbook here, this diagram, but it helps to, I think, to visualize the what you will see, or basically how CSS works, is that box model works. So we have, yeah, hold on here. Yeah, it's on page 72. Okay, so you can see that each of these elements that surround, each of these components that surround an element can be defined separately, okay, if you so desire. So we have the H1 itself, then there's the padding around that H1 tag, then there's the border, and then outside of the border are the margins. And again, if you leave it with none, if we were to go back to the one that I just had, let's go back to here. If I were to take, let's take the margins and I'll just make it 0 pixels. And let's take the padding and make it 0 pixels. It doesn't look, it's presentable, but it's not very easy to read. You know, typically you want a little bit of air around your text to make it visibly a little bit easier for the reader. Let me undo each of those. There we go. So each of these styles that we're creating, and we are using CSS3, which is the most current version of styles, will be defined by or read by the browser and presented hopefully as you want them to appear. Right now, Chrome is the most dominant browser, then Firefox, then Internet Explorer, Safari, then Opera, and then there's some others. And hopefully the page that you create appears the same in all of them. Most browsers have been updated and do significantly or significantly improved and have adopted to the current version of CSS3. And so your pages should look pretty much the same in all of them. Again, if we go to the finished page here and we look at this, some of the things, actually, I don't want to look at that one yet. I want to look at this one. So if you're wondering, what are some of the advantages to CSS, especially CSS3? One of the things that makes it desirable is that if we look here, you can see that there is alpha transparency. If we look at the background here, the white, we can see through it. That was not possible before. You would, I mean, you would have to do it. You could do it, but there was a workaround and it wasn't as adaptable as it is now. You could have, as I said, alpha transparency of background images, of text. You can also add rounded corners now. And as you can see, using our box model, the one here that's in blue, that not only do we have rounded corners, but the corners in the upper left and the lower right and the upper right and the lower left are different from one another. They can all be the same, they can be uniform, or they can be different. We can also add drop shadows, which was not possible before, and that's really nice. You could overuse drop shadows, but they really work well, especially when you have text that's on top of an image that's fairly has complex patterns or colors, and it makes it difficult for that text to be read. Drop shadows will be a good design choice for making it a little bit more legible. So again, here's another use of that. We can use strokes for the text. So not only can we can outline the text, which is really kind of nice. It allows now for multiple columns, which we could not do before. It was much more difficult. We also have options now for gradients, which was, again, you had to put an image behind an element if you wanted to do that, or if you wanted gradients within a text, it had to be an image of text, not editable text. Okay, so these are all the things that are useful now and possible with CSS3. The other thing that makes all of this important and useful for us is that one of the things that we will be doing in our lessons is that we're going to be using Bootstrap styles. Bootstrap was originally developed by the people, I believe, at Twitter, and it was to make sure that your pages and that your work that you were creating were responsive, that they were adaptable to the different size screens that they would be viewed on. And that's one of the reasons that I have I've kept with the 2017 edition of the textbook, to show you that by using Bootstrap style sheets, that one of the things that we can do is that the page that we develop on a large screen will look really good. And then when the same page is read on an iPad or a tablet of some sort, either vertically or horizontally, that it will look good as well. And it will look good when it's on a smartphone. And most of us these days view web pages on smartphones. So we want to make sure that it's adaptable and looks good on all these different size formats, screen formats. And that's what this allows you to do. That's another important reason for doing this, to create websites that are responsive. Prior to this, prior to having responsive websites, all it would do when it would be viewed on a browser, either on a tablet or a phone, would shrink it down, and that's it. And now it can be completely reformatted to adapt to the different file sizes. Now, there is a syntax that's involved in styling CSS That you will find on page 74 of the textbook. And then I want to talk briefly about the cascading theory. And I've already talked about it a little bit in the sense that if you don't format your text or your elements on your page, they will automatically adopt to the basic CSS formatting. So here is, let's see, they'll go to the HTML defaults is what they will do. Okay. So if we look at this unformatted, you can see that this is what your content would look like. Cascading style sheet basics, that if I had links here to the different pages, it would look like this if it were unformatted. If I looked at the finished page, then this is what it would look like. So cascading style sheets, let's look at this entirely in live view, would look entirely different. So you can see that this paragraph here has a box around it, a border, only on the top and only on the left. We can see that we have our page is broken down into 3 columns. We can also see that at the top, we have something called a header, and we have an H1 tag here. And if I click on this, you can see that I have an H1 tag here, and they are different from one another. So we're using style sheets in order to distinguish one H1 tag from another, as an example. Now, there is the descendant theory that, for example, when you style by default an H1 tag, for example, all other H1 tags will inherit that from that point onward if you do apply a style to that. Unless you do otherwise, and then there's the specificity theory, that the more specific the rule is, it will overwrite the ones that precede it. If you don't specify anything that overwrites it, then in effect, they will continue to inherit the default or the preceding styles that have been written for it. Okay. So if you want to see some of these and how they work, you can see in this particular, let's look in here. I'm going to look in this in split view again. And I'm going to go in the header, and let's go in here. And let's look. So in the head of our document, we can see that, not the header, but the head. Let me look in the head of the document to distinguish the difference. And you can see that they are still all in line. And, you know, there are a lot of rules here, a lot of rules. So if I wanted to change any of them, I could change them in this page. But again, if I wanted to apply these styles to another page, I would have to convert this to an external style sheet. And then it would automatically, any page that was derived from this could apply these styles. So there's lots of them here, lots and lots and lots. We start with the basic body. Okay, and notice that the basic body that's been applied is Arial. Color gray, font size 100%. Now 100% of what? Remember I said that that's determined by your browser, and the default size for browsers usually is 16 pixels. We have background image, we have stripes, that's what we see up here. Okay, and then we have background color that can be applied, and this is the hexadecimal number that we'll get into later. Now you can see for paragraphs, H1, H2, and H3, margins have been applied to that. And these are the default, or the rules that have been assigned to this page. So let me go back to live view. And if I look over in my screen here in CSS Designer, I can see all of these rules. And as I click on each of these rules, you'll notice that some of them are highlighted in blue and some of them are not. And when I click on each rule, it will tell me when it's highlighted in blue in Dreamweaver, which areas are being affected by that rule that I've created. So for example, in here, and you'll see that there are others, other styles that we will be creating in this. And for example, we have an H1 tag here, and you'll notice it up in here in the body, there is an H1 tag. So in the body, here is an H1 tag here that rules have been applied, and that is, we have basically the only one under show set has to do with margins. So if unless I specify something different, if I look at the H1 rule here, you'll notice that the only thing that has been changed here for this particular H1 tag is the color to teal, that this one, and the color style is Tahoma, or the font is Tahoma. Now there's other rules here too. I have a class that's been added that's content H1. So look at, I have 3 different H1 rules. I have one in the body tag. That is kind of the core of H1 or of styles, because that will affect everything from there on out. And now I have another one for the content. Okay. And you'll see that that's the purple color here. And you'll notice that the font size is 300%. So that this class that's been added has to do with the content that's been assigned to this particular div that's in here. I know that this is getting confusing, but it will, again, and it will continue to be rather confusing throughout the semester. Hopefully, as we work on the lessons step by step throughout the semester, will become clearer how each of these work. But again, it's all used now to do several things. It's one, to separate style from content. So the visible pages that we have, that are rendered in a browser, the content will be the same from page to page to page, but the style can vary, and that style will be determined by the Cascading Style Sheet. So we can determine the color of the text, how images are displayed, and so on and so forth. Okie doke. That's pretty much what I wanted to cover today. I encourage you to please read the chapter and go over it. It will be like reading Greek if you haven't read it already. But as we do the lessons in the book, it will become clearer how these work. And you'll see that this list over here to the right in the selectors looks like it's a lot of rules, but it's actually quite small compared to what you might find in subpages. They will be quite lengthy. And we haven't even added as I said, some of the bootstrap styles that will also govern the appearance and the structure of our pages. Okay, so that's a basic introduction to CSS. And it's kind of a CSS primer, as it will, that we will use in addition to HTML. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause and see if there are pause the recording and see if there are any questions from you. Okay, so there are no questions. And again, I went over this very quickly, kind of in a shotgun approach, and followed the book pretty closely, but not exactly. There's more that needs to be covered, but I will leave that to all of you to read the textbook, so you have a little bit better understanding of what we will be doing in this semester. In addition to that, though, remember I said that all of you needed to be working on your Wix website. So if I look at mine, and that's what I'm doing now. Okay, this is the one that I started the other day. And I added a little bit. If I go under menus and pages, I'm going to look at my About page. You can see that I swapped out their image for mine. I went into the text and I edited it, and I took my artist statement and I placed that in there. So right now I'm just swapping. I'm taking my content and inserting it into the format of their page that they've created for us. Now, some of the other things that I'm going to do too is that I created a contact. That's kind of a sub page in here. And again, I swapped out their image for mine. I changed the content of the, the page. I edited the submit button. Okay, so when you select each of these elements, you're going to have to go into the settings and edit them and change them. So for example, if I wanted to change the text in here, if I want to edit the text, when you select on each of these elements, they make it pretty simple for you, is that I can click on here, and then that allows me to go in here and make the necessary changes that I want. I can change it from the themes from heading 2 to heading 1. Remember, these are all the elements that we talked about. I can change the font from Arial to another one. Arial is, just as a simple aside, one of the things that I like to use for my websites are sans serif typefaces. I think for the web, they read really, really well. I found that serif typefaces, unless they're, especially will work for headings, but if they're fairly large, but for body copy, that sometimes the serifs get broken up a little bit and make it more difficult to read, unlike what you'll see in print. Remember, I can change the size here. Okay, so I'm going to go back down, to the 24 that they used. They use a lot of default settings here. If I want to change the bold, I can. If I don't, I can change that. Okay. I can change individual elements as well, and you can see that as I highlight this, that's a heading 2. Okay, and I can change that. And if I select this one is a heading 6. And if I select this one, this is a paragraph 2. So each of those basic elements that I've talked about so far will help you understand what elements you're changing in your page as well. From headings, the paragraphs, and the fonts and the colors and the styles that are being applied. And you can see down here that we have alignment. And there are some basic alignments: flush left, flush right, centered. We can see here that we can use, they have bullets and numbering. These are the unordered and ordered lists. We can also decrease or increase indents, which we'll be doing later. You can add effects here if you wish. So if you want drop shadows and that sort of thing, they're adding, just by clicking on these elements, we can add drop shadows, a variety of different styles if you wish, or you can leave the default settings that they have used. And when you're done, we can go back and click on it, and that's it. If I want to change the image, again, you click on it. Okay, and you'll notice at the top here, I have a variety of options available for me. If I want to change the image, you just simply click on it. Okay, and it will pop up and it will ask me, where do I want to get that image? And you'll see that I already have 4 images in my new website here. If I want to get a new one, then I can upload the media from my computer. Okay, and if I don't want to choose anything, I can go ahead and just close it for right now. If I want to, and I will probably later on this week, if I want to eliminate pages, I can. If I want to add pages or I want to copy pages, I can. So maybe I will take the About page and I want to copy it because I'm going to use it for my resume page. I can select the About page, and then here over to the right, I can click and I can select copy, or I can select duplicate. Maybe I will use duplicate. And that will duplicate the page. I will rename it as my resume page. and then I can begin to modify it and change it using all of their online tools to do so. For example, if I select the portrait page, since this was created, this template was used for a photographer. I'm not a photographer, but I want to sort of adapt. So maybe instead of portraits, maybe instead you will have drawings. And for each of these, you can go ahead and put in your own drawings. To make this work, though, you probably want to crop each of your drawings to make sure that they are all vertical rather than vertical as opposed to horizontal, or you'll want to make them all horizontal as opposed to vertical. Okay, and you'll just simply swap out the images, and you can add to or reduce the number of images as needed. I will probably remove this and create my own portfolio page. Maybe client showcase, some other elements here I just don't need. I can get by without them. Or if I want to use them, I can. You'll notice that there's a fashion page. So this is a fashion photographer, portrait photographer. Client showcase, there's nothing in here right now. Maybe I don't need that. I can get rid of it. I can get rid of that page. So again, with that one selected, I can close it, and I can, or I can click from here and I can maybe get rid of it. I can just delete that page. So that's what you're going to do. And one final thing before we close today, and I will be talking about this more, is let me go back to the main menu here. Let's go back to our home page. Is that most websites are broken down into the individual pages are broken down into basic elements, and that you're going to have your header, which is what we see up here. Okay, and oftentimes contained within your header is the navigation bar. The navigation bar can be separate from and can be above or below the header. The header is where you will name your website, where you'll have any, it's sort of a universal design element that you use from page to page to page to give your website a cohesive appearance. Beneath that, you'll have the main content. Now, the main content can be a single column, as you see here. It can be a 2-column or a 3-column. And if it is a 2-column or a 3-column, then you'll generally have the main content, and you'll have a left and or a right aside. And then at the bottom, you have what is called the footer. And you can see that when I hover over this, it says footer. When I hover over this, it just says, main. And if I hover over this one, it says header. So if you're wondering what each of these elements mean, as we're developing the lessons in the book, we will be doing the same, but we will be building ours from the ground up. They have already put all of these elements together for you, and it's just simply swapping out their default content for yours. So what you should be doing now is to be developing or to make sure that you have a Wix account. You need to go through the templates and decide on a template for yourself. And then once you have decided that, peruse it, go through it carefully. And then now you're going to have to develop your own content to substitute through that. So that will mean what we did the very first week of class is to start collecting your images. It's not important that you do a website for yourself. This could be a website about your dog. I know that I had a student a couple of semesters ago. Her family rescued stray animals, and she made her website about that. Maybe you have you're a plumber and you want a website for your business. It could be about that. How would you construct that? You might want to select a template that's appropriate for you for that. Or maybe you're a hairdresser or something like that. If you're a photographer, this would be a good template to choose from. And then your goal will be to take each of these elements, for example, the about page, to, if you don't have anything written about yourself, then take, and we'll talk about this on another day, about where you can go online and you can find kind of starter, do a Google search and find some starter pages for you that will allow you to take content from other sources and adapt it to your own. Use those as templates. Okay, so that's all I wanted to cover today. Again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause. So I'm going to continue with the recording. Everybody, what you should do for the weekend is make sure that you go over lesson 3 and become familiar with both lesson 2 and 3, HTML and CSS. You need to create an account at Wix. You need to then start developing content for that Wix website that you will be building that will probably be due the 6th week of class. At the end of the 6th week. Okie doke. And then proceed to start building it. If there are any questions, I'm going to end today and I'm going to say goodbye. I will go ahead and pause the recording again and you guys are free to leave. And I hope you have a good weekend. And I will see you back here on Tuesday. And we're going to start building website from the ground up. We'll probably start with lesson 4. Okay, we'll go over lesson 3 briefly. Actually, that's what we did today. What am I saying? We'll go over lesson 4 and 5 next week. Okie doke. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause and I'm going to say goodbye. Okay, bye-bye.